pick and prevail in your fantasy football league with the help of our starting lineup. At host to quarterback the show, we have Nick Giacobbe. Up next, a dual threat in Dynasty and Daily Fantasy, we have Cody Repass. And finally, working the waiver wire, we have Nick Cap. These are your playmakers that will provide you with sleepers, breakouts, and busts to help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to episode 30 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we hope you prevail in Week 16 and the rest of the 2021 fantasy football season. I am your host, Nick Giacobbe, and joining me is Nick Cap. Nick, our recording schedule got a little thrown off. For those of you that know, my family lives in New York, and I'm coming home for Christmas, so my week's a little bit crazy with getting hours in at work. Coming home, so we're recording on Tuesday. We're recording on Tuesday, December 21st. We're giving you a whole preview and everything for Week 16, but Week 15 isn't fully over yet. But Nick, how are you looking in your matchups? First round of the playoffs, Week 15.
It's a disaster. Just so for some context, I'm number one in scoring in one league where I was very confident I would go win the title in. The first four players listed in my lineup are Tom Brady, Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, Michael Pittman. That's 13 points from the top. Just the order, not my four best players, but the order. So
it's basically the duds. It's basically the duds and our studs and duds this week.
It's literally one of the worst fantasy combinations you could have had going.
And I want to mention this. I know Matthew Berry and a couple of other people have mentioned this. This is one of the worst overall weeks for fantasy football. It's been horrendous. The only stars that really produced are Kelsey, Mark Andrews, Tyreek Hill, Jonathan Taylor. I mean, I look at the studs duds list right now. That's really it at the moment. If you didn't have two of those guys, you probably lost your matchup. And I'll speak on me. I'm going to score 150 points in my dynasty league, but I'm not guaranteed to win. I'm projected to win by 4. But I'm not projected to win. I literally had Tyreek Hill and Jonathan Taylor. I was starting off with, Tyreek had 35, Jonathan Taylor had 31. I'm starting off with 65 points. I'm projected to score 150. He's projected to score 149. I'm up 10. I have Odell Beckham against that terrible Seahawks defense. He has Jason Myers, Seahawks kicker, and Devontae Smith going up against the football team, which is a really favorable matchup. So that one's going to be really close. And it's disappointing because the other playoff matchup is going to be 117 to 116. So one of the teams that's going to score the most points this week is getting bounced. I ended up facing, he had Brandon Cooks. That was his big score, and he had Mark Andrews. So there you go. If you did not have two of those really top high scorers, you're going to lose your fantasy matchup unless the other guy also didn't have two of those scores, and it's going to be a really low scoring matchup. It does look like I'm going to lose. It looks like I'm going to lose definitely one of these against my pal Vic. So congrats to Vic in our 12-man league. Does not look good for me. I'm down. I'm down 50. There's no bonuses in this league, by the way. I'm down 50. I have Antonio Gibson, Odell Beckham, and the Philadelphia Eagles defense. So possible, but I think I'm going to lose that one. And our pal Nick Ringolo in my league is looking like another disaster. I was projected to win that one, and now I'm projected to lose by 4. He has DK, Goddard, and the Philadelphia defense. I have Odell Beckham. I'm up 20. So I have Odell Beckham in all 3 of my leagues. My girlfriend would appreciate this, but go Rams. Alrighty. Anything else you want to say about this week, Nick? So it's been a disaster. I might go 0-3 in my matchups. I have a bye for my 4th league, so I'll have something next week, but not looking too good.
So I saw this advanced fantasy stat. I know we're talking about how bad the fantasy week was. It said, I don't know the exact wording of it, but pretty much the explanation is, let's say, for example, Kirk Cousins was the QB 8 on the year, and I'm using Cousins not because he did bad or anything, just because he's the first one that popped in my head. Let's say he was the QB 8 on the season. So statistically, more times this week than any week in the history of fantasy football, the guy that finished at his current ranking finished more than double outside of it. So to explain that, pretty much that means Kirk Cousins finished outside the top 16 quarterbacks, and that happened more this week than any other week in the history of fantasy football. So if that doesn't fully make sense, let's just put it this way. If I told you the top 5 wide receivers in fantasy football all finished outside the top 10 this week, and now you just replicated that for every single position, didn't matter who it was, if you were the running back 24, you might have finished.
Basically, what Nick is saying, the top 20 players in fantasy all finished not within the top 40.
Not basically. All of them, but the most in history.
Most of them, yeah, basically. So it really was a horrible fantasy week. So hopefully you guys had some of those big scores, but if not, probably got bounced. So we have a fun show for you guys. We're excited to talk about this. We have a lot of news, unfortunately, a lot of COVID news. We have our weekly wrap for week 15. We have lock flops for week 16, and rapid fire starts it for week 16. So if this is your first time listening, thank you very much and welcome to the show. We do 2 shows a week. Our first show, usually on Fridays. Had to do Tuesday this week again because I'm flying home to New York for Christmas. Christmas Eve is on Friday, just kind of how it goes. Our second show is always a live show, Sunday mornings, 8:30 Eastern time. Are we doing 8:30, right, or 8 Sunday? Because I know you have the Jets game.
We do 8:30.
All right, we're going to do 8:30 a.m. Eastern time this Sunday, live, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We're going to answer all of your questions. We'll post a graphic on Sunday. It'll be a Christmas graphic, probably. Not a Christmas graphic, but a graphic for Christmas to answer all of your fantasy questions. If you want to ask those questions, we can answer them on the show Sunday morning. Hopefully, we all get some Christmas presents from our fantasy football teams. If you want to listen to the show for the audio version, it's available on all podcasting platforms. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, basically anywhere where you can find a podcast. If you listen to Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. If you want to watch and listen to the show, go to our YouTube channel, Primetime Fantasy Podcast, for social media, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, PrimeTimeFFPod, for Facebook and YouTube, Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Alrighty, Nick, injury updates and news. Again, we're recording on Tuesday. We're actually dropping the show on Tuesday. So this is the news that we can give you as of Tuesday. Let's start, Nick, I know I'm going to jump around in the notes a little bit, but let's start out with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because those are probably the more serious injuries. Chris Godwin, ACL injury. I think it's torn. And I think Rappaport said it was torn.
He tore his ACL so and he's gone for the season.
Yeah, so not even for the playoffs. So from a football perspective, big loss for the Bucs. I think he had like 98 receptions on the year. I think he was projected to break some record. They showed the graphic on Sunday Night Football for targets. And for your fantasy season, that's a disaster for the playoffs because Godwin. I'm gonna look up the numbers right here because Godwin's been a very productive receiver. I think I took him in the 4th round of our league. That I'm not gonna be highest in scoring after this week. I'll be down like 20 points, but he's the wide receiver 6 on the year right now. Before he went out for the injuries, before halftime, he had 6 receptions on 7 targets for 49 yards. Probably gonna get you a 100-yard game. He's had over 100 yards the last 2 games. He's had over 15 fantasy points. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like 12 times out of 15 weeks. Been a really productive receiver. So big loss for your fantasy team. I think Antonio Brown's coming back to get slotted into that role, and Godwin probably took a lot of Antonio Brown's role when Antonio Brown left. But still, this is a guy that you were probably counting on for 15, 20 fantasy points a week, and now you don't have him. If you do advance this week, you don't have him for the semifinals or the championship. That's a big loss this late in the season. So, Nick, I don't know if you want to touch on anything else, but no, I'll give you an opportunity.
I mean, I completely agree. What I found more shocking was during the game, Mike Evans was ruled out sooner, and they were talking about Godwin coming back in the second half. He was doing full sprints on the sideline. And then you hear, he's probably gone. You hear from reports, he's probably gone for the week. Right after the game, you hear he's probably done for the regular season. And then the next morning it came out, it was torn ACL, gone for the year.
Yep. Other Bucs news. Mike Evans has a hamstring injury. It looks like he is going to be out. I don't think he's going to play next week. He's week to week. That is my projection. I don't think he plays next week in Carolina. We've seen what these hamstring injuries can do. A.J. Brown was out for a couple of weeks. I think Hopkins have a hamstring? Was it the ankle? There's another receiver that had the hamstring. My point being, it's a little bit tricky with that hamstring, and against the Panthers, he's going to be up against Stephon Gilmore. So, Nick, again, I'm going to give you an opportunity. I'll do Leonard Fournette, and then you can say anything you want to say about the Bucs. Leonard Fournette has another hamstring injury. This one, he's probably going to miss a game or two. Arians said in a quote after the game that it's Rojo's time to shine and do what Fournette did last year, which isn't good if you're a Leonard Fournette owner, because Arians is basically saying, let's give Ronald Jones the rock and see what happens. And if Rojo does play well, Fournette's carries could get eaten into, and he's been a top 10 fantasy back on the season. Lastly, for the Bucs, Antonio Brown is eligible to return from a suspension on, I think it's Wednesday, so I think Antonio Brown will get slotted right into that role that Godwin was playing. He's going to get a lot of targets. He'll be a very valuable receiver for the rest of your fantasy playoffs. So,
for anyone that's concerned about should I play Antonio Brown because of injury suspension, no. In short, there's 2 times where he returned to Brady, and those first weeks he finished with double-digit fantasy points, and he now has chemistry with Brady. He is going to be the wide receiver 1 next week. Like, he's slotted in for a big game.
Yep, especially if Mike Evans is limited.
If someone dropped Antonio Brown in your league and he was on waivers, or if you picked him up, like, I'm pissed because I picked him up just in case Godwin went down. And I'm probably going to lose in that league because Godwin went down and Brady couldn't move the ball without him.
Yep.
Antonio Brown's probably going to go win you a league this year.
Yep. All right. AJ Brown is designated to return from the IR. I think he had a hamstring injury, so he should be playing next week. Jamal Williams activated from the COVID list for the Lions. Let's talk about this line situation. So Jamal Williams activated from the COVID list. Craig Reynolds, who had double-digit fantasy points in back-to-back weeks, we all thought it was going to be Jamar Jefferson, but it's actually Craig Reynolds. He's officially signed off the practice squad. And DeAndre Swift is still week to week with his injury, so I don't think Swift is going to play next week. So would you play a Lions running back next week? How would you kind of navigate that Lions situation?
So the Lions play Atlanta.
They stink.
Jeff
Wilson just had double-digit fantasy points against them.
So you know how all year it feels like play whoever's playing, play whatever defense is against Atlanta, play whatever defense is against Detroit. I don't know which defense you play here. I don't know if you play either, but
neither.
This feels like the makings of what people are going to say. It's going to hit the over. These defenses suck. The offenses are average-ish. And it feels like it's going to say that, and it's just going to hit the under. It's not going to be a fun game. It's not going to be fun for fantasy. That's pretty much my outlook on the game. I would feel comfortable playing whoever the starting running back is because I just know Atlanta's terrible against the run. The defense is horrendous, so I feel comfortable with it, especially after what they did to Arizona. I mean, you should just ride the hot hand at that point.
Yep. Joe Mixon has a sprained ankle. No other updates on that. They won't practice till tomorrow. John Harbaugh is hopeful that Lamar Jackson practices Wednesday. I know he had a chance to play Sunday, so I would think that Lamar plays Sunday, but again, we're recording on Tuesday. We don't know. Austin Eckler placed on the COVID list. No idea if he's vaccinated. Did you see anything about that?
I haven't seen anything.
Okay, so that'd be if Eckler's not vaccinated, there goes your running back and the running back 2 on the season for your fantasy playoffs.
Yep.
That's a mess. And he would miss both games, I think, right? I think he might miss both games in that case.
Could he?
I think so. If he got
I think it's only if their game's on a Thursday night.
Okay. Gotcha.
So they play Houston next week, which should be Eckler running back.
He'd be running back 1. Yeah, he'd be running back 1 next week. Drew Lock is probably starting for the Denver Broncos. I don't think any of those Broncos receivers are startable anymore.
I don't think any Bronco outside those running backs are.
Elijah Mitchell's going to be a game time decision, but there's little hope to play according to Kyle Shanahan on Thursday. If you have Jeff Wilson, you could lock him in. He had 18 fantasy points this week. Jalen Waddle's coming off the COVID list. He has another week to be healthy. They're playing the Saints on Monday night. Duke Johnson's being signed to the Miami roster after 102 yards this week.
And 2 touchdowns.
And 2 touchdowns, yeah, big week. For the Giants, Daniel Jones out for the season with his neck injury. Sterling Shepard is out with an Achilles injury. The Giants have been an absolute dumpster fire for like the whole season. Travis Kelce's on the COVID list, but he's vaccinated. So hopefully for you Travis Kelce owners, he could play on Sunday. Because again, that would be just like Eckler. Huge to miss him in the fantasy playoffs. And then Kendrick Bourne is on the COVID list. So, Nick, if you want to touch on any of that stuff, I'll give you the floor.
Go pick up whoever's playing the Giants rest of the year. I think Dallas has them one more time, so they might be on, but Washington this week has them. And the Giants could not hold the football. They could not put together a competent drive that finished in a score all game.
Does Philly not have them? I have the Philly defense. I picked them up for some reason for week 16.
It might be Philly.
It is Philly. That's why I picked up the Philly defense.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I don't know. I'm looking at the Cowboys playing the Washington. My bad. Yeah, go pick up the Eagles. The Eagles should shut them down.
Yep.
Eagles force turnovers too, so you should have a good game with them.
And sacks. Alrighty, we're going to go to the weekly wrap. Studs and duds from week 15, starting off with the quarterbacks. Quarterback 1, Tyler Huntley, 35.9 points. Quarterback 2, Patrick Mahomes, 29.6 points. Quarterback 3, Aaron Rodgers, 23.82 points. And quarterback 6, Josh Allen, 20.8. Who's your biggest quarterback stud of the week, Nick?
I can't believe that we have to look at this list of Tyler Huntley in the playoffs and actually have to talk about him as viable if Lamar's out another week. Tyler Huntley's reliable starting quarterback if Lamar is out. I hate to say it, but the guy can run. He makes good enough throws. They get the ball down the field. The offense knows how to move. And the Packers defense has been pretty solid all year, and they just they just torched them for 30 and nearly won if they got the 2-point conversion. And next week they're at Cincinnati. And Cincinnati, they had the Bengals. The Cincinnati had the Ravens number earlier this year, but in the history of the franchise, the Ravens have always smoked the Bengals. So you got to give it your shot.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I want to mention this from Herbert. I'm going to talk about a little bit in our next segment, but Herbert's the quarterback 3 on the year though. He's had, 5 straight weeks of 19 plus fantasy points or more, and 3 of those 25 fantasy points or more. So Herbert started to rock and roll. Quarterback duds of the week. Kylo Murray's been on this list a couple times now. 12.5 points, quarterback 14. Quarterback 17, Dak Prescott, 10.5. And quarterback 24, Tom Brady, 4.7. First time he's been shut out in like 20 years or something like that. Who's your biggest quarterback dud of the week?
I know people want to talk about Brady or Kyler because Kyler's been a little consistently down here recently since the injury. Brady has, this is horrendous for fantasy playoffs. But both kind of feel like one-offs. I think Kyler is a little more concerning with the D-Hop injury. I'm going to talk about Dak because Dak really has not been startable in recent fantasy weeks. He's really underperformed lately. He's the QB 12 on the year. Over the last 3 weeks, 11 points, 9 points, 10 points. That's not cutting it. 1 touchdown in each of those games from him. That's just not good enough for fantasy. So you really should consider pivoting from Dak rest of the season.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about Dak too. I'm a Dak owner in that 12-man league that I am the highest scoring team, and I have the buy-in, and Dak's my quarterback, and Dak's kind of my problem at the moment. So I want to talk about Kyler Murray. He had those 30 points against Chicago first week he came back. Then against the Rams, tough defense, 19. Then against Detroit, 12. And now he's at Indy. Indy's been a really tough defense over the past few weeks. That worries me a little bit. I'm not saying bench Kyler, but Saturday night might be a little bit of coal in your stocking if you're playing Kyler on Christmas. I don't think you're getting Chris Kringle. I think you're going to be getting somebody who's a shell of his former self. I think the Colts might shut him down a bit, especially without Hopkins. And it just feels like the offense has kind of lost momentum. So we'll see what happens, but I'm a little bit worried about Kyler for this week in your fantasy playoffs. On to the running backs. Duke Johnson, 25.7, running back 1. Running back 2, Jonathan Taylor, 23. Running back 3, Jeff Wilson, 19. Running back 5, James Robinson, 17. Running back 6, Zeke Elliott, 16. And running back 7, Deontay Foreman, 15.5. Who's your biggest running back stud of the week, Nick?
This is the most disgusting list I've ever had to look at in the history of this podcast. This is hideous. Why is this the top 7? Come on. It's fantasy playoffs.
We thought that that Myles Gaskin would be one we'd be talking about against the Jackson. It's Duke Johnson, and Duke Johnson was very productive when he was with Philly. Like 4 weeks ago, we were saying he was a waiver wire pickup, and then I went back to Miles Sanders. So
I'm gonna tell you my fear with Duke Johnson, and
Jordan Howard was with Philly. Excuse me. Sorry about that.
I am very scared that he's gonna be this year's Kenyon Drake from 2 years ago, where he steps in for the starter out of nowhere and just lights it up and finishes, for the playoffs as the RB 1, 2, 3, 4 league winner. And it's like, there's no reason that this guy should be the league winner. That's my fear. And I pray, no offense, Duke, I just pray it's not true, because I really do not want to see Duke Johnson be the reason someone wins the fantasy playoffs after a hard fought season.
Well, We'll see how Duke does in the next few weeks. He's not the most famous Duke that we know. Running back, I want to talk about James Robinson because you were down on James Robinson. I was debating putting him as my lock last week, but I didn't.
I said I was down on him up until Urban Meyer got fired. Then I was fine.
That's true. But yeah, James Robinson finally got the production that he should get, and now I do. I'm not going to say anymore. I'll say more in the next segment. Also, I was wrong about Deontay Foreman. You should have played him. Sorry, guys, if you listened to me. I was wrong. All right, our flops of the week. Running back 19, Saquon Barkley has a nice timeshare in the flop segment, 9.4. Been a real bust of the year for sure. Running back 21, James Conner. I was wrong, 9 points. Running back 28, Melvin Gordon at 7. Running back 33, Myles Gaskin had 5. Running back 36, Kamara had 5. Running back 40, Naji Harris had 4. And running back 41, Cordell Patterson had 4. That is gross all around. Those last 3 guys may have lost you a fantasy matchup. Who's your biggest running back flop of the week?
I know everybody's going to want to talk about that 36, 40, 41, Kamara, Najee, Patterson. I'm talking about
the Saints won that game without Kamara playing well, which is absurd to me.
Yeah, so my problem is Saquon being here. Saquon finishes the RB19. If I told you finishes the RB19, be like, all right, it's better than weeks past. But 9.4 points, it just shows you that at the RB19, how off this fantasy week was.
Yeah,
there should be no reason that the top 20 running back on the week finish with less than double digits. I'm sure the 18 or 17 did as well. And Saquon Barkley is not that running back. From a pure football perspective, Giants should absolutely be getting rid of him after this year. And he's just not the same running back that he was. And Devontae Booker is a better running back than he is at this point.
He's playing better, yeah. For me, I want to talk about Naji Harris. I know it's an off game. I know he doesn't have many of those, but that whole Steeler team, they won, but they looked horrendous on offense. They really just didn't. Nobody showed out for the Steelers. I have Deontay Johnson as my lock of the week. We're going to talk about as a flop in a second, but yeah, that was a rough one for Najee. So if you have Najee, I have Najee in one league and I'm facing him in the other. We'll see which teams lose or win that had Najee. So on to the receivers. Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 1, 32.8 points. Wide receiver 2, Brandon Cooks, 29.2. Wide receiver 4, Christian Kirk, 24.4. Wide receiver 5, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 23.5, who Nick said to play and I said not to play. And wide receiver 6, Russell Gage, 23.1. What a weird list. Only one of these guys was drafted in like the top 8 rounds. That's number 1. So Nick, who is your biggest wide receiver stud of the week?
Mine's number 5 and number 6 on the list. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Russell Gage. I think they're must-starts for the rest of the season. You look at their target share, you look at their game script. They're terrible. I can guarantee you, I don't know if they are down here because I didn't look, but they should absolutely be the debate of who yep, it is. Nick put it down here. Who in this game are you starting? It's part of our rapid fire segment. It's Russell Gage or Amon-Ra St. Brown. Both of these guys have been really consistent as of late. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, has 35 targets over the last 3 weeks. That you have to start someone that's got that kind of production. Russell Gage, ever since he got injured over the last 4 weeks, 18, 22, 11, 24, has 2 touchdowns in that time, averaging a little less than 100 yards per game. I mean, the 2 of these guys pretty much came out of nowhere and started shocking the world in these last few weeks. And I think both of them are must-starts for the rest of the season.
For me, I'm going to go with... I'll go with Brandon Cooks just because he dunked on me. And my pal Jake, who's probably going to end up beating me tonight. Brandon Cooks dunked on me with like 34 fantasy points. He's a wide receiver 12 on the year. Probably got you drafted in like round 10. Like, he's been one of the best late round gets in fantasy football this year. And he's been pretty productive throughout the entire season. Obviously, everybody has down weeks, but Brandon Cooks, for the most part, I mean, he's only had like 3 or 4 games under 10 points, and he's had like 7, 8 over 20. That's a really productive fantasy wide receiver. So if you play Brandon Cooks, you probably won your matchup this week. The duds from the receivers: Deontay Johnson, 9.8, wide receiver 26. Then we're jumping to wide receiver 49, Brandon Ayuk, 4.6. Wide receiver 49, T. Higgins, 4.3. Wide receiver 65, Amari Cooper, 2.8. Wide receiver 69, Mike Evans, 2.4. Wide receiver 73, Chase Claypool, 1.9. Wide receiver 76, Michael Pittman, 1.7. Wide receiver 81, Jamar Chase, 1.3. Wide receiver 90, Jerry Jeudy, scored as many fantasy points as me sitting in this chair. Who's your biggest wide receiver dud of the week?
Just all of them. You all are pathetic for your performance this week, and every single one of you should be ashamed. Every fantasy owner that had to start you and lost should be ashamed. You did what you had to do, but not when the lights came on bright for the playoffs. All of you deserve a disgrace, except for Evans, who had to deal with an injury.
I'm putting both of the Steelers wide receivers. I'm walking them through the streets like Cersei in Game of Thrones going, shame, shame, shame. The Tennessee Titans defense is horrendous against wide receivers. They're terrible. They give them like the most fantasy points to wide receivers. They both had 20 plus fantasy points the week before against the Vikings. Deontay Johnson's been spectacular this year. The target share is enormous. Just a horrible, horrible, horrible performance against a great matchup when you lock those guys in thinking they're going to give you a big, big week. I know the Bengals receivers had a tough matchup, so not faulting them as much, but just horrendous, guys. Horrendous by those Steelers wide receivers. On to the tight ends. These were the biggest performers of the week. Travis Kelce, 41 points, tight end 1. Tight end 2, Mark Andrews, 35.6. Took a stinky one right on my face. Dalton Schultz, tight end 4, 20.7. Tight end 5, George Kittle, 15.3. Just couldn't get that 100-yard bonus 7 points away. 7 yards, excuse me. Tight end 6, Zach Ertz, 13.4. And tight end 7, Kyle Pitts, 11.7. I was wrong on him. So, Nick, who is your biggest tight end stud of the week?
I haven't talked about this guy at all this year, so I'm going to give him the praise he deserves. He's the tight end 1 on the year. It's Mark Andrews. I can't believe Mark Andrews managed to put up 35 with Huntley.
I can't either, and he was facing me this week. That's the reason I'm going to lose. I can't believe it.
If you watch that game corner to corner, you could just tell how phenomenal of a player Mark Andrews is. And I've never given this guy any credit, so I want to take this one on the chin. Apologize. You're the tight end 1 so far. Me, Nick, and Cody, we predicted Kelce, Waller, and Kittle. Each of us respectively said one of them would be the top tight end, and Mark Andrews has a real shot to beat out Kelce for the tight end 1 on the season.
Yeah, mine would also be Mark Andrews, so you can I'll let you take the lead. You did. I have nothing else to say. Congrats, Jake. You won because of Mark Andrews and Brandon Cooks. Like I said at the beginning of the show, you had 2 studs. You probably won your week. And the tight end duds of the week, Pat Freiermuth, tight end 13, 7.7, and Gronk, tight end 19, 4.9. For me, it's Gronk. Gronk's been very productive this season, but the tight ends pretty much produced this week. But again, Brady and the Bucs just very off games. That means it was an off game for Gronk.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about Gronk, too. I'm not taking too much out of this. I think next week he has no problem. I think you're still starting him. His target share is too high. He didn't play particularly well, but Tom Brady didn't play well. Tom Brady, over his last 2 seasons against the Saints, is 0-4 in the regular season, not including the playoff win that they got last year. So Sean Payton has his number. That team has his number. That defensive line, that pressure has his number. So I'm not taking much away from it. Out of all the teams Brady has faced in his career, this has been his one kryptonite. So I'm not taking too much away from it.
Alrighty, we're going to move on to lock or flop. 1 quarterback, 1 receiver, 1 running back, 1 tight end you should lock, and 1 you should flop from both of us. Who's your quarterback lock of the week, Nick?
I hate to say it, but the fact is, based off everybody's play, you're going to have to play him, and I know he just had a rough game. It's Taysom Hill. The Miami Dolphins are not good against the run. They really are not. I don't care about how they did against the Jets. And over the last 3 weeks where Taysom Hill's been playing, he's averaging 70 rushing yards per game. You're averaging 70 rushing yards. That's 7 points on the ground. That doesn't include the passing game and the touchdowns. And Miami's defense allows points to other teams. The Saints, they're not really in too much of a groove on the offensive side, but Taysom Hill, even 3 weeks ago against Dallas, had 4 interceptions and still finished with 20 points without those interceptions, finishes a QB 1 or 2 on the week. So Taysom Hill, his floor is just too high with that rushing upside against the terrible Miami team where you know he's going to run the ball and he's going to have some sort of air production. He'll find the end zone, but he didn't this week. I'm not concerned. I think you play him.
I'm going to play Dak against the Washington football team. I know he didn't have a great week 2 weeks ago against the football team. but they've given up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. I'm playing the matchup here. I know they have a couple other COVID issues. I don't know what their roster is going to be like on Sunday. Cooper just had a really down game. Just playing the matchup of when somebody has a down game, they usually come out and produce the next week if they're a star. I still think Dak's a star. I still think Cooper's a star. I'm going to play the matchup here. I know it's tough in your fantasy playoffs, but I feel like you just got to ride him. I don't know what other backup quarterback you could really trust in the semifinal. It's just really tough to be like, oh, I'm going to go play Tua against the Saints, or I'm going to go play Taysom Hill against Miami. I just feel like it's just so tough to trust in your semifinal. And maybe that's kind of what you have to do to take that risk, but I'm going to trust Dak and think he gets you a pretty safe number against the football team. Who's your flop for this week?
So I'm not only saying they're going to be a flop, I think they're going to be horrendous, and I think a lot of people are going to play him based off the poor performances from this week. It's Carson Wentz. He didn't play particularly well for fantasy purposes, but the team didn't need him. They ran the ball through Jonathan Taylor the entire game. They pretty much did what New England did to Buffalo, except the Colts did it to the Patriots. I think a lot of people are going to play him thinking that he's going to light up Arizona like Jared Goff just did. But I just don't think that's going to happen. Arizona's going to bounce back. They're a good team. I think the Colts might still find a way to win this game because, as I've been saying for weeks, they're one of the most dangerous teams in football. But I'm still not starting Carson Wentz. I think people are going to bench people like a Kirk Cousins who didn't play particularly well for fantasy, or a Matt Stafford who hasn't been in too much of a groove. Cam Newton, I would debate that one, but I think Cam Newton is worth the start because of the rushing upside. People are going to flop some of these guys and put them on their bench. I just don't think Carson Wentz should be the guy that you're streaming this week.
I'm going to bench my personal quarterback one on the year, and he is the quarterback one at the moment in terms of average and fantasy points. I'm benching Josh Allen. It's the same situation as to why I was going to bench Russell Wilson this week, and I did bench Russell Wilson this week. Josh Allen's only had under 16 fantasy points twice this year, the first against Jacksonville, the second against New England. I'm worried about how he plays. And this one's at New England, too. I'm worried he gets you a big stinker. I think it's going to be a defensive game, very low scoring, and Allen's not going to post you top 10 quarterback numbers. So I'm going to bench Josh Allen. I'm going to look for another option. This is one where I just said don't bench Dak, but I think I would. It's so tough to say bench him, but you know what? Last year, I didn't bench Russell Wilson against the Rams, and I lost. I had Herbert as my backup, but I lost. And there's probably other. I would have to look at who's on your waiver wire, but let me see if I'm going to look for a guy. Just going to this week's matchups that I could find that maybe who do the Vikings have this? Well, they have a tough matchup. They have the Rams. I'm not playing Kirk Cousins. I would play. I mean, you're not going to have Herbert as a backup. Let's
Huntley.
See. Is Huntley starting? If Huntley starts
starting.
They're facing who?
Cincinnati.
Yeah, but they've had a tough defense, though. I think I would do it, though. I think I would do it.
Derek Carr against the Broncos.
Nope. Broncos defense good, and Carr looked real stinky last night.
Big Ben against Kansas City.
I would need to see who your backup quarterback is, because some people do have good backup quarterbacks. But if you can pivot off of, I think I like a Taysom Hill take. If Taysom Hill's available, I'll go play Taysom Hill over Josh Allen. So
interesting.
All right, going to the wide receivers. Who's your wide receiver lock of the week, Nick?
I just said it before, and I'll say it again. It's Antonio Brown. I think he goes out there and wins you a league. Each of his first games with Brady, his first game in New England and his first game in Tampa, he showed out. He played extremely well on a limited timeshare. They're not going to give him a limited timeshare. He's been in the offense for too long. He was dealing with a suspension. I think he's better from the injury, so you don't have concern. Bruce Arians said they're not giving him any more of a penalty. He already suffered enough by having to miss 3 games. Antonio Brown's going to be out there on that field, and Antonio Brown is going to possibly win you a fantasy championship.
Odell Beckham has really started to build chemistry with Matt Stafford. Last few games, 5 receptions on 10 targets and a touchdown. 2 receptions on 5 targets and a touchdown. 6 receptions on 7 targets and a touchdown. Tonight he has the Seahawks. I have him in 3 leagues and actually need him to absolutely torch the Seahawks. But next, that's tonight. Again, we're recording on Tuesday. Next week, he has the Minnesota Vikings, who have given up the most fantasy points to wide receivers. you want to talk about league winners? I think Odell Beckham could be a league winner because if you have Odell Beckham tonight against the Seahawks like me and you need a solid 20 points, I think he could get that. If you need him to get 20 in your flex spot next week against the Vikings, I think he could get that. Then he has the Ravens, who have been like, again, middle of the pack against wide receivers. They were really good to start the season, but I think they've come to middle of the pack at this point. But still, I think he's a guy that could win you a week. Who's your flop of the week, Nick?
Mine's Tyler Boyd. I think a lot of people started him after this past week. He had 5 catches on 6 targets for 96 and a touchdown. Obviously, a very solid week considering how everybody else did this week with 20 points. But that was his first touchdown in 7 games. He hasn't cracked 14 points in those last 7. He's really become a touchdown-reliant receiver, and he does not get enough of a target share in the offense. Jamar Chase is clearly going to bounce back based off every time. I think he had 2 bad games this year, Chase, and he's bounced back from both of them with a big one. So Chase will bounce back for you. T. Higgins had a bad game. He's been one of the most consistent receivers in fantasy football. He's going to bounce back and have a big game. And Tyler Boyd has been one of the most inconsistent receivers in fantasy football. So for me, I can't start Tyler Boyd even knowing he just had this great week and riding the momentum. I think it's going to be a trap game for a lot of people.
I think Justin Jefferson set up for a trap game. He's had a touchdown in 3 straight games. He's had over 80 yards in 2 of those games. He's had over 80 yards in like his last 5 out of 6 games. Last night he didn't against the Bears. I wish he had more. I played him and KJ Osborne. Bad decision on Osborne. I'm very scared about him against Jalen Ramsey. I'm very scared about that Vikings team. I feel like the Rams could smush them by 15 points. You're definitely not playing Kirk Cousins. You're not playing KJ Osborne. I'm worried about Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen if he does return, whoever that wide receiver 1 is. For now, it's Jefferson. I don't say bench him, but I'm definitely not excited to start him. So I think he's going to flop this week. Running backs, Nick, who's your lock of the week?
Mine's Michael Carter. I know he came off a rough week this week, and I know I've been high on him all season. So maybe a little bit of my Jets bias, but I think the Jets are a better team than Jacksonville. Even with the new coach, they weren't able to beat the Texans. Usually when you get rid of your coach, you have a lot more fire, and the team had nothing under them. They clearly just lack a ton of talent. They're not good enough to hang. And I think the Jets are a better team. I think they're better coached. I think they have more talent on the outside. I think that as a complete roster, I think both teams stink, but I think the Jets are the better of the bad teams. I think when you're the better of the bad teams, you just find a way to win, and the way you win against Jacksonville is you pound the rock. You're going to give Tevin Coleman, you're going to give Michael Carter 35 total carries. Michael Carter is going to get those short check down passes as he has all year long. I think Michael Carter gives you a good enough fantasy week against a terrible defense to go win you a week.
I'm going to talk about the other running back in that game, James Robinson, because the Jets have surrendered the most fantasy points to fantasy running backs. So I think James Robinson's going to be a top 3 running back again. I think he was number 3 this week. I think he's going to be top 3 again. And both of these teams stink. Whoever loses this game should be crowned Lord Stinkerton of the year in the NFL. Who's your running back flop of the week?
Mine's Josh Jacobs. Over the last 2 weeks, only is averaging about 12 carries per game. Hasn't had 52 yards this past week, 24 the week prior against Kansas City, and he's going up against Denver, who has one of the best front sevens in football. It's going to be extremely tough for him to deliver a productive fantasy game. They've been using him a lot more in the passing game than I thought. I'm going to give him credit for this. Over the last 5 weeks, he's averaging about 7 targets per game, which is absurdly high considering how people thought he didn't get used enough in the passing game, and you see the transition from the bye week when they let go of Gruden, where they're using him in the passing game. So Jacobs clearly has some floor and some upside there. But once again, Denver's front 7 has been shut down. They just shut down Joe Mixon, and Joe Mixon was a top 5 running back in fantasy football. Josh Jacobs doesn't have that upside. The Raiders don't have that scoring upside. So for me, I think Josh Jacobs is going to be a massive, massive flop on the week.
Yeah, that's a good take. For me, it's going to be any Miami running back. The Saints have been the toughest defense against fantasy running backs. Leonard Fournette was held to, I think, 11 points. I flopped them last week. I'm flopping Myles Gaskin and Duke Johnson. Don't chase the points. Don't chase anything on that Dolphins team. Don't play either of them, or you're going to get a really bad number in your flex spot or running back 2 slot. Tight ends, Nick. Who's your lock? Who's your flop? Or you lock first, at least.
Mine's Kyle Pitts. Believe it or not, Kyle Pitts has delivered on his ADP. He's the tight end 5 in fantasy football at the moment. Kind of crazy to think about. This past week, he had 7 targets, got 4 catches, 77 yards against San Fran. This week, he has Detroit, who has no one on the back end that's good enough to hang with Kyle Pitts. So lock him in. Go expect your big week from him. Hopefully, he can deliver this week. Give you one of those Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, George Kittle games.
I said you're not playing any Broncos wide receiver. Didn't say tight end. You're playing Noah Fant this week. The last time he faced the Las Vegas Raiders, who have surrendered the most fantasy points to tight ends, Noah Fant had a nice, cool stat line of 9 receptions, 9 receptions on 11 targets, 97 yards, and 1 touchdown. Last week, he had 5 receptions on 6 targets and 57 yards, 10 points. I think he gets in the end zone again this week. I think he gets 60, 70 yards. I think he gets like 5-6 receptions from Drew Lock. It's a big Noah Fant week. If he's on your waiver wire and you need a tight end, he's the one to play this week for sure. And who's your flop of the week for the tight ends, Nick?
Mine's Hunter Henry. He's coming off a massive week, 25.7 points, 6 catches, 77 yards, 2 touchdowns. Massive week for him. But he has not put together back-to-back massive weeks this entire year.
And he has a tough matchup against Buffalo.
He has a tough matchup against Buffalo. I'm going to tell you exactly how your game's going to go. In the first quarter, you're going to go see that he has 3 catches for 20, 25, maybe 30 yards. And then you're going to wonder why in the fourth quarter he has not grown a single point. And it's because the last time they played, guess what they did? They ran the ball 45 times and had Mac Jones pass all of 3 in the first half. For the entire game 3 times. I forget. But it's not a good recipe for them to win for your Hunter Henry to have a massive game. And I just think you're going to be so uncomfortable that entire 1 o'clock slot. I'm not taking the stress of it. I don't care what the upside is. You never know with Bill Belichick if he's going to go out there and say, Mac Jones, go throw 40 times and let's go beat these guys. But I just don't think that's the case. I don't think that's going to happen. So for me, Hunter Henry, he had his big week last week and think that's where it ends.
I wouldn't stream him either. For me, it's Darren Waller. It looks like he could return next week, but if he does, I don't think I'd play him. First game back from an injury is worrisome. Last time he faced Denver, he did have 5 receptions, 59 yards, 10 fantasy points, but Denver surrendered the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to tight ends. So that combination, and now with the Raiders' offense, is really just taking a downward spiral. I wouldn't play Darren Waller this week. I would look to see if there's a backup option that you could play because it just doesn't really look pretty. Maybe like Zach Ertz. The Colts have given up the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends. Maybe like Zach Ertz is available, especially after he had a couple dud weeks. So that's my tight end dud of the week. We're going to end things with rapid fire. We're going to give you guys 1 player from each game, tell you which one we would rather play. 1 player from each team, I should say. So let's do it. Thursday Night Football. We never get to do Thursday Night Football because the show usually releases on Friday, but Jeff Wilson or Deontay Foreman?
I think this is an excellent question. I feel like this is a great comparison by you, Nick. I'm going with Deontay Foreman. I think Foreman's clearly become the RB1 in that backfield. And if it's Elijah Mitchell or Jeff Wilson, Deebo Samuel's taking carries out of that backfield and putting big yards behind it, big chunks of the field. So as long as that's still happening, I don't know if I trust Jeff Wilson. I know he finished with a solid fantasy week. I think he finished with 18 or 19.
Yeah, 19. He's running back 2 or 3 on the week.
Was he? The 2 or 3? Yeah. Well, he did need to get into the end zone to deliver on that. So,
yeah,
maybe he still needs to do that. And Tennessee's pretty shut down in the front 7. So,
yeah, both of these defenses are top. Well, Tennessee's 2 against the run and San Francisco's 7. So it's going to be really tough for either of these running backs. If you can avoid them, I'd avoid both of them if I had to play one. I think I'd play Deontay Foreman because I think there's a guaranteed workload there. I know A.J. Brown should be returning from injury, but I'm not trusting Ryan Tannehill. I think they do need the run game to go through that offense. Nick Chubb or Aaron Jones? The Browns and the Packers are one of these teams that's really tough to do this segment because there's no flex guy. You're just playing the stud. So Chubb or Jones, Nick?
I'm going to go with Aaron Jones. I know A.J. Dillon finds the ball a lot near the goal line, but Aaron Jones is too much of a threat in the passing game. I think Kareem Hunt's back this week from the COVID list, so I think Nick Chubb goes back to that shared workload, and I really don't trust either of them at this point in the year.
Yeah, I'll go with Aaron Jones too. Packers have been tough against the run, 6th least amount of fantasy points surrendered, so I am going to go with Aaron Jones as well. Michael Pittman or Christian Kirk that looked like the wide receiver 1 for the Cardinals last week?
I'm going to go with Michael Pittman. I think Michael Pittman's clearly the wide receiver 1. I think that Arizona's still figuring out how they make these wide receivers work now that D-Hop's not there. So I think they find a way to get Rondell Moore and AJ Green in there and kind of spread the love. Zach Ertz clearly, Chase Edmonds also gets a workload. So I think it's just too crowded there, and I think Michael Pittman's defined as the wide receiver one there.
I'm also going to go with Michael Pittman for the reasons that you just stated. I know he's had a couple of rough weeks, but I think he needs a get-right week, and this could be it. Wentz could toss him a touchdown or two. I know OBJ and Cooper Kupp both had huge weeks against Arizona last week. Darnell Mooney or Tyler Lockett if Lockett comes off the COVID list, which I think he should be eligible to do, but I could be wrong on that.
I'm going to go with...
I'll go with Mooney because I like picking against the Seahawks almost like a gimmick at this point. Their defense is terrible. I can see the Seahawks only winning this game by like 4 points because it's what they do. So I'll pick Mooney.
I'm going to go with Lockett because I think Mooney needs that. They don't really use him in those 5-yard passes unless it's really a screen. And Seattle's edge rush is actually not terrible, and the Chicago offensive line is probably the worst in football. I've never seen a rookie quarterback take as many big hits as I've watched Justin Fields take this year.
Yeah, he's taking some big ones. Russell Gage or Amon-Ra St. Brown? A question with two of Nick's guys.
Start them both. They're both massive. I'm going to go St. Brown. 35 targets over the last 3 weeks. That's better. I think that might lead the league in targets over this 3-week span. So when you got that kind of production, you don't stop it.
Falcons are giving up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. The Lions, I can't even find them. The Lions have gotten pretty good against wide receivers. So I'm going to start Amon-Ra St. Brown, USC guy. Fight on. Hollywood Brown or Jamar Chase? Starting Chase. He had a bad week last week. Yeah, I feel like he's due for one. He's just a guy that's due. He's going to have a big one. Odell Beckham Jr. or KJ Osborne. Maybe I should have said Jefferson. Any Vikings wide receiver, I'm going to play OBJ over. I'm saying that right now.
I'm on board with you. I'm playing Odell.
Dawson Knox or Hunter Henry? We had the same question when Pat's Bills faced a couple weeks ago.
I'm going to go with Dawson Knox.
I'll play Dawson Knox. He's been reliable. He's been Josh Allen's favorite target in the red zone. If the Bills are going to win this game, I think they need Dawson Knox to get into the end zone. So I will play Dawson Knox. James Robinson or Michael Carter, both of our locks of the week. So we know who we're picking here.
I'm actually going Robinson. I think Robinson offers much more upside.
Okay, there you go. Saquon Barkley or Miles Sanders?
It's a good one. I want to see how Sanders played tonight and how they use them.
Yeah, but he had 20 fantasy points last week. I think I'm going to go with Sanders just because the Giants' run defense is not great. Zeke Elliott had top 5 numbers last week, and the Giants they're like my trash bag over there that smells, or maybe Russ and his stinky ass farts over there. They're terrible. They're horrible. So, Antonio Brown or DJ Moore? I don't like DJ Moore. I haven't liked DJ Moore for like 2 years, so I just pick against him like all the time. So I'm just going to pick Antonio Brown because I think he has a guaranteed workload, and Brady really tries to work him into that offense.
I love DJ Moore and think he's talented, but I'm still going Antonio Brown.
Mike Williams or Brandon Cooks? I love Cooks on the year, but the Chargers have been really tough against the receivers, so I'm going to pick Mike Williams in this one.
I'm going to go Brandon Cooks. I'm going to ride the hot hand.
Deontay Johnson or Tyreek Hill? The Chiefs are another team where it's really tough to do this segment. They just don't have really anybody I can really pick from. Or maybe we could pivot to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Claypool. I don't know. I'm gonna pivot this one a little bit. In this game, I'm playing Tyreek Hill, Kelsey Mahomes, Deontay Johnson, and Najee. That's all I'm playing in this game. And
I'm going to come in with a little bit of a shocker. I'm going to take Deontay Johnson. I think Mike Tom, really, really smart head coach. He knows that cover 2 defense. The Steelers, a ton of talent back there. I'm not doubting Tyreek Hill, but I just think Deontay Johnson workload, and I could see Kansas City struggling against that Pittsburgh front seven. So, Josh
Jacobs or Javonte Williams? I'll take Javonte Williams just because of his talent, but I wish he was getting the running back 1 carries.
Yeah, I'm on board with you with that. I think he barely edges him out. I think if you had to rank running backs on the week, I wouldn't be surprised if they were like 14, 15.
Yeah. Like mm-hmm. Terry McLaurin or Amari Cooper?
Terry got hurt the last time they played with the 4 targets and the injury and finished with 0. But Cooper's been so inconsistent. I don't know if I could ride Cooper on this one. I think I'm going to go with the talent of Terry.
I'm going to ride with Cooper because I think he's one of those guys that's really due for a big game. And if him and Dak don't have big games, and they have some problems heading into the playoffs, and the Cowboys had not that playoff Super Bowl team that people thought they were a couple of weeks ago. Monday Night Football, Tua Tagovailoa or Taysom Hill? I'm going to say Taysom Hill, but you know what? The Saints have given up like a lot of points to quarterbacks. I know they didn't against Brady last week, but they've given up the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and they also struggle against running quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts had a ridiculous stat line against them a couple of weeks ago, so I don't think Tua's going to have a bad game against them.
I agree with you, but I think Taysom Hill just presents a lot more upside with that rushing ability.
I'm with you. It's the safer play. So
yeah.
That is our rapid fire for this week. If you have any other questions about your lineup, we'll have a question graphic posted to our social media channels on Saturday. We'll answer those questions on the live show Sunday, or join the live show 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Facebook and YouTube Primetime Fantasy Podcast, Twitter PrimeTimeFFPod, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time for Week 16. That's all we have for you for this show. Please support us on all podcasting platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, Anchor. It's where you can listen to the audio versions. If you're on iTunes, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. Support us on social media: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, PrimeTimeFFPod, YouTube, and Facebook, Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Nick, anything else you want to say for Week 16?
I pray you guys walk out of this week with more than I did. Good luck. We'll see you Sunday.
Also, I want to wish all of you guys a Merry Christmas if you do celebrate. Hopefully we'll get some nice Christmas presents on Sunday. Good luck, guys. Talk to you real soon.